All right, we've made it through the top 10, and that means the next pick off the board belongs to the Tennessee Titans. Big one here. Let's talk about this pick, and you have them going with Welcome into the Hot Read Podcast. I'm your host, Easton Freeze, director of published content here at BroadwaySportsMedia.com. We're also brought to you by the 440 Podcast Network. Hope everybody is having a great day. I don't know what day it is because, just to let you in a little bit behind the scenes here, we just recorded an episode of James Foster Friday with our buddy James Foster, who we love to have on to talk about all things scouting and evaluation and the NFL draft. And we just went through his mock draft 1.0, every pick for the entire first round, all 31 of them. Yeah, the Dolphins don't get one. They had to forfeit it. But it was fantastic. And what was supposed to be our regular James Foster Friday segment of 20 to 30 minutes on our Friday episode turned into an hour of us going through the 31 top prospects in the draft. And we decided we're going to make it a standalone episode. So that's what you're listening to now. Welcome to the James Foster Mock Draft 1.0 episode, standalone. We're not talking any Titans outside of the Titans 11th overall pick in this episode. We're going to talk about all things mock draft. So come on in, enjoy James educating myself and yourself on all things first round draft pick this year. Learn about some guys you may not have heard about just quite yet. Very great time talking to him. Without further ado, let's get into our conversation with James Foster. All right, let's welcome in James Foster on a James Foster Friday. James, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Doing great. We're here to talk about the draft. Once again, we appreciate you joining us as always. And today we're going to be going through your mock draft 1.0. You have picked a selection for each team at the position in the draft that they currently are slated to pick at. Now, we don't know for sure the very top of the draft. Right now, it's all a guess because the playoffs have to play out to know exactly where everybody picks. But we have an idea for the first 20 some odd picks now. And we're going to, I believe you stuck with no trades in this one, correct? So this is chalk top to bottom. All right, so we'll just go through top to bottom your picks for the draft, and these were your first 5 picks. So let's start with the first overall pick. If the Bears do stick at 1 and don't trade with the team who needs a quarterback, you have them going with maybe the top overall non-quarterback in this draft, Jalen Carter out of Georgia. Big fella, 6'3", 300 pounds, the junior defensive lineman. He's going to be talked a lot about over the coming days and weeks, but tell me a little bit about Jalen Carter and why you love his game so much.
Yeah, Jalen Carter's, I think, pretty clearly the best overall prospect in this class. Quarterbacks are going to, I'm probably going to have some quarterbacks ahead of him on my big board just because I factor in positional value.
Right.
But, just in terms of overall skill set, you look at his length, how quick and talented he is with his hands, explosive first step off the snap, and really good bend to finish sacks and flatten his angle to the quarterback. So I think that he's definitely the best defensive lineman prospect since Quinnen Williams.
Wow.
Probably, a toss-up between those two. Really the only weakness that I really see for Jalen Carter is he is a little bit high cut just in terms of his build, and you'll see him kind of get slowed down as a pass rusher when offensive linemen are able to get underneath his leverage. And, if they can get inside hands and kind of, stand him upright a little bit, it really does neutralize his pass rush. So that's where I see him not being as effective. But, I think that the Bears are one of those teams that just, they need a hit in the draft. And I think Jalen Carter's a pretty safe pick.
Now, I know that you did this mock draft without trades. Do you think that the Bears may consider sticking and picking with this number 1 overall pick, or do you expect, like many do, that they'll probably trade out?
I would expect them to trade out. I just don't know that they're in a position really to try and take another swing at quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the arguments that people have been, putting forward about how um, statistically Justin Fields was one of the worst passers in the NFL last year still,
Mm-hmm.
and the rushing production kind of balanced that out a little bit and made him a league average-ish quarterback. But I think towards the middle of the season, people did kind of jump the gun in terms of declaring Justin Fields as a hit. My thing is, I don't feel great about putting Bryce Young behind this offensive line. Like, I don't know if Bryce Young makes it out of this season on the
Alive.
active roster.
Right.
Like, the reality with a team like the Bears and a lot of teams like them is that you need a quarterback with the size to withstand a lot of hits and sacks.
Well, let's talk about that, because at number 2, you have the Texans going with Bryce Young, and among his very positive traits overall, the one thing you can look at him, and I really do mean look at him and see, is this guy's pretty slender for an NFL quarterback. You're going to need to protect him, and you're not sure just how much of a beating he might be able to take over the course of a season and stay upright.
Yeah, it's ever since I started getting into this class, um, Bryce Young is still my quarterback one, but it really wouldn't surprise me once all the trades and the order shakes out. It wouldn't surprise me if someone like Will Levis ended up being QB1 just because of the size and because
This is why I put money down on this as early as I could. I think
I
it's a very
have
real
a
possibility.
GM GM's draft and view talent in the draft way differently than most casual fans. Like,
Yep.
When you look at like the quarterback discourse so far, it's basically just like, who is the best college quarterback? It's like Will Levis threw a bunch of interceptions, bad quarterback, he's going to be bad. Bryce Young was good in college, he's a good player, so he's going to be good.
But GM's draft for traits much more
Projecting
than
to
they're
the
playing
NFL is way more
college.
about traits.
Yep.
And Bryce Young just doesn't have those physical traits that really would make me want to trade up for him, or that would make me feel 100% confident about him being QB1. With that being said, outside of that, he is the cleanest quarterback prospect in this class. And really, I don't have worries as much about the size and in terms of seeing over the field, because he's been pretty effective throwing over the middle with a NFL sized offensive line in college. It's really just about sustaining the hits and is this going to be a really good quarterback that plays 9 games a season?
Well, at number 3, you have the Cardinals going with the guy that a year ago I think many would have expected would have been the top guy off of the board. It certainly would have been the top pass rusher off the board. Jalen Carter ended up leapfrogging him this season, but Will Anderson Jr. out of Alabama, another big guy, another great player. What are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, Will Anderson Jr. is kind of in the Aiden Hutchinson tier of edge rusher, where he doesn't necessarily have like Myles Garrett, Chase Young type of athletic traits, but he's just kind of like a B plus, A minus in every single aspect of his game. I think he had 200 total pressures in his college career. You watch him; he's able to win with a diverse set of pass rushing moves. He's a constant impact in run defense, and so similar to Aiden Hutchinson, I don't know that I ever see Will Anderson Jr. becoming a top 5 edge rusher, but I think probably like the highest floor pick in this top 10.
Well, James, that's the impression that I've gotten over the past couple of weeks, that maybe out of the top 4 or 5 guys that go in this draft, Will Anderson, he may not be the best at the end of the day, when everybody's careers are wrapped up, but he seems to be the most maybe fit proof or scheme proof hit. He feels like the safest choice here at the top. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would put Jalen Carter in that tier, and I think it's a little bit harder to find elite defensive linemen than it is edge rushers, and so that's
Fair.
one thing that has Jalen Carter ahead. but yeah, I mean, Will Anderson is like hitting a double or a triple. I don't watch baseball, but something solid.
Back to the AFC South, we've got the second quarterback off the board. It's the Colts. You have them going with CJ Stroud. Now, what I find most fascinating about this is that you have them picking Stroud over Levis. Just to kind of skip forward, we can link these picks together a little bit. At 5, you have the Seahawks going with Levis. So talk to me about how you have been through your process distinguishing which of these guys you prefer. It seems like maybe it's a fit choice, and maybe that's why you have the Colts going with Stroud. Is this a reflection of how you have them ranked so far?
So I think I have Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, and Will Levis all in a very similar range as
Okay.
being like the second to third overall pick value type of player. And then Anthony Richardson, spoilers, he's more of like a bottom of the top 10 kind of pick to me.
Mm-hmm.
So, Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, Will Levis, I think are all close enough to where it's like within the margin of error where you could prefer one guy over the other depending on your scheme. I like the way that Will Levis fits in the Seahawks offense, very similar scheme to what he ran in 2021. So that's just kind of how I fit the players there. And then I think it's really hard. I tweeted out like I've never watched an individual game from a player that affected my opinion on them more than CJ Stroud's playoff performance against
And James, I
Georgia.
saw that take from like 17 different evaluators
Oh
that
my
I
god!
follow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, it went kind of crazy, but yeah,
Yeah.
uh, it's a difficult thing to balance because you don't want to overreact to one game, but he really did. It's like once you can see something on film like actually happen and you're not having to um imagine in your head
Project
like,
it.
okay, maybe he could, he shows these flashes here, maybe he could develop into a quarterback that's good under pressure, because he was the worst quarterback in college football under pressure last season. It wasn't like
Wow.
it wasn't first to last, but it was like first to second last in terms of CJ Stroud's clean pocket PFF grade and his under pressure PFF grade. It was like 92 versus 30 or something crazy like that. So people saying, "Oh, this CJ Stroud's always been there on tape." No, it hasn't. This was a completely different type of performance than we've ever seen, and so when you have a close quarterback class like this, those are the sort of things that can kind of bump one guy over the other.
Well, you mentioned Richardson. You have him going at number 6, which he seems to just be climbing higher and higher up these boards. He's the most intriguing quarterback to me in this draft class, simply because you talk about GMs looking for traits in these guys, and the traits with Richardson are really, really fascinating. I mean, he's a big, big guy, 6'4", 232, sophomore quarterback out of Florida. He's been compared, not erroneously, but, we do this irresponsible thing every draft season. He's got a very similar build and play style, it seems, to like a Josh Allen type, at least in the running game. And he's got a big arm. So tell me about Anthony Richardson. What do you see in terms of potential in him?
Yeah, he's like a combination of Josh Allen and Malik Willis. Maybe he's sort of like he's like Malik Willis, except every strength is more of a strength and every weakness is less of a weakness.
Okay.
Like, we talked about Malik Willis having great athleticism and great arm talent. Well, Anthony Richardson has maybe the biggest cannon that I've ever seen for a college quarterback. And you could probably go back to some, like, I guess you'd have to go back to Lamar Jackson probably for like the best scrambling quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
Not just scrambling, designed runs, and he's also able to throw on the run and keep his eyes downfield. But I think that people are underrating Anthony Richardson just in terms of how pro ready he is. He's really accurate throwing down the football field. He actually, does a pretty decent job of processing defenses. Florida's offense is not, it kind of falls into that range of like not great for evaluating NFL quarterbacks, in my opinion. But Yeah, I think people are kind of overselling or overestimating how much work Anthony Richardson needs to do um, before he can be a competent NFL quarterback. And he's speaking of performance under pressure. He's one of the best quarterbacks, probably the best quarterback outside of Bryce Young at operating from a
Think we may have lost you there for a moment, James. You still got us?
Yeah, sorry, I got a different call. What's the last thing you heard?
We heard you're talking about clean pockets or unclean pockets.
Yeah, so kind of going back to the pressure versus clean pocket thing. Anthony Richardson was one of the best quarterbacks in college football under pressure last year. He very similar to Will Levis in the way that he can execute throws from awkward platforms, different arm angles and stuff like that.
At number 7, you have the Raiders going with Myles Murphy, the edge defender out of Clemson, junior, 6'5", 275. What do you like about Myles?
Yeah, Myles Murphy and my 8th overall pick, Brian Bresee, are actually pretty similar in that it's still a lot more traits than production at this point. Myles Murphy is in that Trayvon Walker tier of prospect where he just kind of has the dream build for an edge rusher, but really not a lot in terms of pass rushing technique and move set. So he's going to have some development to do. I really like putting Myles Murphy on a team that already has a bona fide number one edge rusher. Really, similar to the Trayvon Walker situation where he's not being asked to come in and immediately be the main focal point of a team's pass rush.
And you went ahead and you mentioned the 8th pick. You have the Falcons going with Brian Bresee, teammate of Myles Murphy, the defensive lineman, same height. He's 6'5" as well, but he's coming in at 300 pounds. Tell me about Brian.
Yeah, my biggest issue with Brian Bresee, I'm probably a little bit lower on him than consensus is. My biggest issue is just consistency with pad level and play strength, really. This like 7 to 10 range is like a huge dead zone for this draft. It's the area that I just really wouldn't want to pick because 7 through 10, all 4 of these players, I'm not really a huge fan of, but it's just kind of like they are the best players, so you got to pull the trigger.
Right. Well, at number 9, sorry, were you finished with Brian?
Yes.
Okay, number 9, we've got the Panthers taking the first wide receiver off the board, Quentin Johnson. No surprise there, out of TCU. We talked a little bit in a past episode about this wide receiver class and how, as compared to even last year's class, it's relatively weak. I don't know. I guess we'll eventually see by the end of this exercise how many wide receivers you think are going in the first round. But what is it about Johnston, by the way? I said his name wrong. What is it about Johnston that sticks out to you as a guy that could be a top receiver in the NFL?
Yeah, he's 6'4", probably going to run sub 4.4. Has a pretty nice release package off the line of scrimmage, and he's really, really good after the catch. He has a ton of big plays from this past season where he catches like a 10-yard curl route or something, and then he just has this really explosive spin move to the outside to make the defenders miss.
Mm-hmm. Do you have an NFL comp to him yet? I know this is your favorite.
It's going to be
world,
no,
right?
I don't. That's usually the last thing I come up with. I go to just behind the curtains. I go to Mock Draftable.
Which try to line up like those webs, baby.
Combine data, and then I basically just like go through dates and find guys with like similar builds, and then I come up with like 10 players that are similar athletes, and then I go through their skill sets. So I'll figure that out. Quentin Johnston, to me, I'm not a huge fan of, just because he's not really a talented catcher of football. 8 for 23 on contested catch situations this past year, along with, let's see, what along with 8 drops. So yeah, he was kind of inconsistent just in terms of how he was being used in TC's offense, but I think this is a really boom bust pick with Quentin Johnston.
At number 10, you have the Eagles picking up Tyree Wilson, edge player out of Texas Tech. This guy's a big fella, 6'6", 275 pounds. I see here that he's got versatility inside and outside, put up 50 pressures last season. What do you like about Wilson? And it's, by the way, unfair entirely that the Eagles at 10 would be able to add yet another weapon to their defensive line, but they're going to be able to.
Yeah, I know. It's insane. Tyree Wilson's probably going to have the longest arms of any player in the NFL.
I'd imagine.
I think I saw that he has a bigger wingspan than Giannis Antetokounmpo.
Holy cow.
Yeah, you're looking at like the dream build for an edge rusher, or I even think a 3 technique. I think moving him inside and having him add some weight is where he's going to be his best.
Okay.
Because the biggest issue with Tyree Wilson is he's just really stiff in open space. There's a lot of, anytime that he's like defending a read option or a cutback run, there's just a lot of missed tackles and poor angles, and he just doesn't really have that agility to turn the corner that you want from a traditional edge rusher. And so, I think in terms of the team fit, I like Tyree Wilson going to a team where, similar to Myles Murphy, where he's not asked to be immediately productive, and they already have talent along that defensive front, and they can kind of ease him into the lineup.
All right, we've made it through the top 10, and that means the next pick off the board belongs to the Tennessee Titans. Big one here. Let's talk about this pick, and you have them going with Paris Johnson Jr. This seems to be the guy that you have kind of zeroed in on for the Titans from the get-go here. He's the only guy I've heard you really talk about as who they should target at 11. He'd be some fantastic help, of course, as a tackle, replacing Taylor Lewan, you'd imagine. 6'6", 310. He's done a ton of blocking in general, but he had 449 pass blocking snaps last season. Only gave up 14 pressures. That's music to the ears of any Titans fan who wants to see the Titans get a little bit better in pass protection. Tell me about Johnson Jr. and what you think the fit might be here if he comes to Nashville.
I think Paris Johnson Jr. is a scheme-proof offensive tackle. I just did a video on him, so definitely check that out on my YouTube channel, A to Z Film Room. But he's probably the best zone blocking tackle in this class, but also the best gap scheme tackle. He just creates so much displacement on down blocks and double teams, but then when he's out on the move, he just like punishes linebackers and defensive backs at the second level. In terms of pass protection, his biggest issue, like the number one issue that you're going to see during the draft process, is that he is kind of vulnerable to getting beat inside. That's actually why my comp for him is Ike Ekwonu from last year's class, but he is a bit of an oversetter, and he'll open up that inside. He has the foot quickness to recover back to the inside. It's more of an issue with hand placement and getting his hands too wide. So, it's his first year playing left tackle ever. He played, right guard, I think, in 2021. So first year playing left tackle, that's a completely understandable issue to have. I think he's, right along the ideal track in terms of his development.
At number 12, you have the Texans picking once again, and you have them going with the second wide receiver off the board, Jordan Addison out of USC. Tell me about Jordan Addison.
Yeah, Jordan Addison was the first player that I evaluated. Really kind of like Will Levis versus Bryce Young kind of question for me.
Okay.
Just in terms of upside versus skill that they already have. I think that, Jordan Addison is kind of like the Bryce Young of receiver prospects in this draft, honestly.
Well, yeah, I'm looking here. He's 6 foot, 175. I'm imagining he's the burner variety. Is that correct?
And in retrospect, I probably, if I'm going to go Bryce Young with my first pick, I'm probably going to lean towards athletic upside for the second one. So I might not, love that pairing of Bryce Young and Jordan Addison in reality, even though I think they're both really good players.
At number 13, you have the second tackle coming off the board, going to the Jets, Broderick Jones out of Georgia. Now, I failed to ask you this when we talked about Paris Johnson Jr. Is this reflective of your tackle rankings? Do you have Johnson Jr. as your number one tackle in the draft?
Yeah, Paris Johnson Jr. is my number one offensive tackle by a pretty wide margin. I think, I have a top 5 grade on him.
Okay.
And don't have a top 15 grade on any other players. Broderick Jones, I'm a little bit lower on. He's like one of the biggest offensive linemen in college football, but he is kind of stiff when it comes to his recovery ability and pass protection,
6'4",
and as a run blocker. So I don't know. I need to go back to his film. I watched all of his film like early in the season, so I need to go back and revisit it because he's one of those players where I sort of hear everyone talking about him as a lot higher draft pick than I view him. The issue is that a lot of teams need offensive tackles, and so I kind of just started. And it's the same thing with receiver. After about like pick 16, it's like, all right, I'm having to dive into the second rounders for the back half of the first round.
We're getting into the back half of the first round slowly but surely, and we're starting to talk about some names that I think most casual fans may not be all that familiar with just yet. So enlighten us a little bit. We got a name here, cornerback, first cornerback off the board. I'm kind of surprised to see this as your cornerback one, but I want to hear your thoughts. You have at 14, the New England Patriots selecting Devon Witherspoon or Devin Witherspoon out of Illinois. What do you like about Witherspoon?
Yeah. So I think the two best individual college cornerback seasons that I've ever watched are Derek Stingley's sophomore year in was that 2019 or 2020? And then the second best cornerback season I've ever watched is Devin Witherspoon's 2022 performance.
Okay.
Just going to read you some stats for Devin Witherspoon from this past season. He played 425 coverage snaps. He was targeted 63 times, and he allowed 22 receptions for 206 yards.
Wow.
He had the highest PFF coverage grade ever for a college cornerback at 92.5. He played 115 press coverage snaps and allowed 1 reception for 1 yard. And he also ranked second among college football corners with 14 pass breakups. So really just like perfect tape, honestly. There was a play against Indiana, which was like a triple overtime game, but a play against Indiana where he kind of like lost track of a receiver. This is week 1, lost track of a receiver down the sideline, gave up like a 30-yard gain. And like, that's it. I have like my bad folder. I just did a Devin Witherspoon video that dropped a couple hours ago. But I organized all the clips for the videos that I want to talk about by like kind of category. And I got to the section of Devin Witherspoon getting beat, and it's like, all right, well, I don't have anything to talk about, so I guess the video's over. So yeah, he accelerates. His acceleration, he might like he might have set the record for broad jump at the combine. Really the biggest weakness for Devin Witherspoon is he's listed at 180, which is not great for a cornerback. But I think he will test pretty well because the speed and acceleration just pops off the screen.
At 15, you have the Packers going with a wide receiver, which will be just hilarious if Aaron Rodgers finally moves on, and then the Packers decide to draft a first-round receiver. You have him going with Jackson Smith-Njigba out of Ohio State. He is a guy that's been talked about quite a bit, despite apparently being your wide receiver 3 on this board. Comes in at just under 200 pounds, 6 foot. Tell me about Jackson Smith.
Probably a slot only at the next level. He really has mastered just the art of route running and getting open. But He's undersized, and he's probably going to run in the 4.6s. So, kind of hard to see
weird
GMs,
mix of traits there.
being in love with Jackson Smith and Jigba, and you also consider that it doesn't really have any tape from this past season. So I think that I've heard the Amon-Ra St. Brown comp for Jackson Smith and Jigba. I think that's probably the best one that I've heard. But yeah, he's a lower upside but high floor receiver pick.
At 16, you have the Commanders going with the tackle Peter Skoronski, who it's been debated so far, and I'm sure it will continue to be, whether or not he's going to be a tackle or a guard at the next level. Tell me about Skoronski and tell me about how you differentiate between those two positions.
So Peter Skoronski is probably going to have – there's never been an offensive tackle with as short of arms as Peter Skoronski that's like started. I'm sure there's probably been a couple that have been in the draft, but like active players, there's no one that's
shorter arms than Dylan Radins.
Dylan Radins has 34-inch arms, actually.
So, does he actually? He just doesn't play like it? Gotcha.
Pretty solid length. No, Dylan Radins, like one of the most fraudulent combine performances ever. You look at his mock draftable, you're like, dude, this is peak human performance. This is like the peak athlete. And dude, he is like
not that.
But yeah, Peter Skoronski probably going to be around 32-inch arms, which it's an issue because you see him kind of hanging on by a thread against some big like Nebraska edge rushers that are kind of getting into his chest and beating him with length. And when you're projecting to the NFL, you just anything that are things that are minor problems in college, you're looking closely at and you're saying, okay, this is probably going to be a bigger issue in the NFL. And
so what I'm hearing is, Peter Skoronski, you are the NFL's next $20 million offensive guard.
Yeah, I think you draft him. Anyone that has shown, and he's technically the best, in terms of his technique, he's the best offensive lineman in this class that I've watched so far. And I think when you have a player like Peter Skoronski, anyone that's shown flashes, anything of the ability to play offensive tackle, that's so much more valuable of a position than guard. So when you draft one of those players, let them fail at tackle and then move them into guard. I don't like drafting like a tweener like this and then just kind of punting on whether or not he can play tackle.
You have another tackle coming off the board. Right behind him at 17, you have the Steelers going with Anton Harrison, tackle out of Oklahoma. What do you think about Anton?
Yeah, the Steelers seem to not value run blocking at all, which makes Anton Harrison a good scheme fit. He's a really good pass protector, and I really do have issues with his run blocking. So the way
only
that
9 pressures on 447 pass blocking snaps last season, so he must really stink as a run block.
Yeah, he's got the length, foot quickness, really everything that you want. Really impressed with his anchor ability. Really everything you want in terms of a pass protector. When I was doing this mock draft, I have 21 first round grades. And when I was doing this mock draft, it's like getting towards the end of the draft, I'm having to sort of fill in players, but I want to make sure that I've watched these players before I actually talk about them and like put my name on them being good. And so Anton Harrison, I watched, and then I watched like 3 games of him, and then I watched a few more and kind of lowered my grade on him. So I don't think I would take him at 17. I don't think the new and improved James Foster would take him at 17. But yeah, I think the Steelers have to improve their offensive line. I think that's a pretty non-controversial take.
At 18, the Lions get a second pick in the first round, and you have them going with a cornerback, Christian Gonzalez, out of Oregon. This is a guy that I'm not sure many people would have watched a ton of this year, considering where he played. Tell me about Christian.
So Christian Gonzalez, like pretty much every cornerback in this class, is going to be around like the 6'1", probably 190, 195 range. There's a ton of tall press corners. in this draft class. But he has really, really high end speed, and he's one of the most balanced and just comfortable moving in short areas for a taller cornerback that I've watched. Really good job. Like he probably had 7 or 8 pass breakups on fade routes. Really good job being physical at the top of the route. And he if you look at his stats, he gave up a lot of yards. There were a lot of plays where he was in tight coverage and just kind of lost to contested catch situations. But yeah, I think Christian Gonzalez, just because of athletic traits, he would probably be my bet to actually be the first cornerback off the board. And between him and Devin Witherspoon, they are my 14th and 15th overall players in the class. So it's with a position like cornerback that's so dependent on scheme. I think you can go either way with that. The Lions, just like Amani Oruwariye, had one of the biggest fall offs that I've ever seen for a cornerback. So yeah, they need help in the secondary.
At 19, you have the Bucks going with cornerback, and this is a team that definitely needs help in the secondary as well. You have them picking Joey Porter Jr. out of Penn State, 6'2", 198. Tell me about Joey Porter Jr.
Joey Porter Jr. is pretty much like the definition of a press coverage only cornerback. Like that's really what his game is just being disruptive at the line of scrimmage, using his length. There really weren't any other corners this season that were as effective and successful as Joey Porter Jr. was against Marvin Harrison Jr. Had some really impressive reps. He had one of the best individual performances week 1 against Purdue. He had 5 pass breakups, which is kind of insane. So if you're wanting to just like watch one game of a guy and get a good sense for like how he plays the football, just watch Joey Porter versus Purdue. But yeah, he is kind of just with taller cornerbacks. He's not in that Tariq Woolen, Sauce Gardner tier of athlete where they're 6'2", 6'3", but they can also move like a 5'11" player. He moves like a 6'2" player. So he is going to kind of need to be protected by scheme.
Yeah, 143 yards allowed in 10 games this past season sounds like a guy that could be fantastic in the right situation. At 20, we're into the 20s, and we've got the Seahawks taking Nolan Smith, edge defender out of Georgia. What do you like about Smith?
So Georgia is becoming one of my least favorite teams to watch, especially the defense in terms of the draft, because they just do not unleash their front 4 defenders at all.
Yep.
And it turns into a situation where you're not as much evaluating film, but you're skipping through hundreds and hundreds of plays to try to find like the 3 reps per game where Georgia let Nolan Smith actually like pin his ears back and rush the passer.
Why do they do that?
Well, at the college level, that like their front defenders have run defense responsibility first and foremost, and that's just like philosophically they have the players in the secondary to be able to hold up without like an immediate pass rush, and so they just sort of play more conservative up front. And it's a great example of how things that work in college, like that's a good, Kirby Smart is a great defensive coach, but just because something works in college, it doesn't mean that it's going to be great for translating to the NFL.
Yeah. So with Smith, so
Smith is like
kind of off track there. Sorry.
Yeah, he's like 6'3", 240 maybe.
Yeah.
So kind of undersized, but former number 1 overall recruit in the 2019 class. One of he fits the bendy speed rusher mold of athlete, but he has a really diverse and polished pass rushing moveset, and he's a really, really good run defender for his size. I think he had like a 90.5 run defense grade last year, above 80, 75 in that range for his career. And he really does kind of, as a shorter player, he does use that size actually to his advantage to create leverage when it comes to anchoring against blocks.
At 21, you have the first tight end coming off the board for the Jaguars. It's Michael Mayer out of Notre Dame. Tell me about Michael, and why do you have, tight end's not a position you always see go in the first round. What is it that he brings to the table that makes him a first round pick?
Yeah, so when I have a team like the Jaguars, where you've got a star quarterback on a rookie contract, what I'm trying to do is stack weapons and just like really go all out on offense. And they've got a lot of guys at receiver with Calvin Ridley coming in. Evan Ingram, he had a breakout season. Regardless of what they do, I think his contract is up. Regardless of what they do with him, he played 87% of his snaps in the slot last year. So these players don't really play the same position, and I don't think there's a conflict there. Michael Mayer is like probably the best, just overall well-rounded skill set for a tight end since he's a better blocker than TJ Hawkinson was, better blocker than Kyle Pitts was. Obviously not the athlete that Kyle Pitts is. That's his biggest weakness, is that he's just an average athlete, but his ability to separate, make contested catches. I think that getting a security blanket type of tight end for Trevor Lawrence over the middle of the field is going to be huge for them.
At 22, you have the New York Giants picking up a guy that's probably going to play in the slot, but be a weapon nonetheless for Daniel Jones next year. It's Josh Downs out of North Carolina, 5'10", 175. So I'd imagine he's got some speed to him. What do you like about Downs?
Yeah, I really like his ability to create after the catch. As an undersized player, I thought he had great body control in contested catch situations, really nice ability to track the football. So the receivers, all the receivers, I think there are a few more receivers that come off the board. They're all reaches. Like, I don't have a first round grade on Josh Downs, but this Giants receiving core is abysmal. And
it's rough, man.
They just, it's kind of like they gotta grab the guys before they go off the board.
Fair enough. At 23, you have the Ravens going with a cornerback, Cam Smith, a Gamecock out of University of South Carolina. What do you like about Smith?
So Cam Smith is, I was listening to the PFF Stock Exchange podcast. They were talking about Cam Smith, comparing him to J.C. Horn, where he has the mentality. He has the mentality of J.C. Horn coming out of South Carolina. Like, he's the guy that made the drop your nuts comment, like in the post game or whatever. So he's kind of like, has that dog in him. But I think that his speed is pretty questionable. If you go back and watch the Tennessee game, like, look at how far they were playing him off the line of scrimmage against Jalen Hyatt. You can just tell, like, I feel like he's another player that's kind of gone down in my mind since I made this video. Watching a few more games of film on him, I don't know that I see him as a first rounder, but he is really good in press. And another thing with Cam Smith is I think that his size is mislisted. I've seen some places have him as 6'1", 6 foot. I think he's like 5'11". So yeah, I think Cam Smith would actually be more of a second rounder in retrospect.
At 24, you've got the Chargers going with a tackle from the University of Tennessee, Darnell Wright, coming off the board. What do you like about Wright?
So Darnell Wright has some of the quickest and most balanced feet in pass protection that I've watched. He just kind of, the way that he slides around the pocket is so effortless. When we compare him to someone like Broderick Jones, where it's like every movement is kind of stiff and it's like he's just, holding on for dear life. There are times where Darnell Wright's mirroring a speed rush from BJ Ojulari, for example, and like he's literally spinning around the pocket like dancing after the play. I can't even explain it. It's just he has such effortless athleticism and movement skills to where it's like he's just kind of fucking around sometimes. Tennessee's running scheme was not. It's kind of hard to get a gauge on how he is as a run blocker, because a lot of times it's just like counter RPO, down block, and you're just kind of like a stalemate on the 3 technique or whatever. So I'm not sure about his run blocking, but Darnell Wright versus Broderick Jones, that'll be a great internal debate within my head about who I'm going to have ahead of one another.
At 25, you got the Cowboys going with Jalen Jones, cornerback out of Texas A&M. Tell me about Jalen.
Yeah, so this is a guy that I actually I included as a first rounder, even though I don't really have a first round grade on him, but I just kind of wanted to shout him out. So for the Cowboys, cornerback 2 is the clear weakness of the defense. And Jalen Jones is another 6'2", 205-pound cornerback. He led all college football corners in snaps per reception given up, which makes him not a very fun player to watch film on. Like the ideal cornerback film is Roger McCreary, where every stat line is like 12 targets, 6 receptions, 80 yards, 3 pass breakups, and an interception. Like that's what I'm trying to see battles.
Right.
Jalen Jones, it's like 40 because I go to their PFF profiles and I'm looking for, I want to start with the games where they have the most action, right? Or against the best competition. So I'm looking at Jalen Jones and it's like every game is 35 coverage snaps, 1 target, 0 receptions. But yeah, he's another one of these guys at 6'2", that can just move, unlike a lot of players at that size, and really good impress. Had just an extremely clean game against Bama. Wasn't targeted, didn't allow a reception, but you watch every single coverage snap in that game. I don't know that he let a single Alabama receiver get open.
At number 26, you have the Bengals getting some offensive line help, which they clearly have needed for 2 years now. They've got injury problems, which is giving us a little deja vu to last year's playoff run when they had nobody on the offensive line to help out. This year, they've got a bunch of injuries, and I'd imagine they'd like to replace some of these older guys with some young talent. You have them picking DeWan Jones out of Ohio State, and holy cow, this guy is a behemoth. 6'8", 350 pounds. Tell me about DeWan.
DeWan Jones is one of my favorite players in this class. Maybe the guy I'm waiting to get my board filled out, because I really want to be able to compare myself to the consensus board and see like where I'm lower and higher on guys. I think DeWan Jones is going to be someone that I'm probably highest on relative to consensus. I'm excited to see what his arm length measures in at, which is, I know, like the nerdiest comment anyone's ever made. But yeah, I think outside of Tyree Wilson, like he's going to have freaky arm length. If you just like name search me on Twitter and DeWan Jones, if you're listening to this, and I tweeted out a cut up of him using what's called the snatch trap technique, which is where when a pass rusher moves their weight forward as they're trying to get into a bull rush and they kind of get unbalanced, you just sort of grab them by the chest or the collarbone, anywhere on the jersey, can be the arms, and then slam them onto the ground. And he just has really heavy hands. But I think he's a really, I think the rest of his game is really solid as well. So yeah, with who's the right tackle that just got injured? Lyle Collins for the Bengals.
Yep.
I'm assuming he's probably done. So yeah, they need a right tackle, and they probably actually need a left tackle as well.
At 27, we're almost done here. We've got the Vikings taking Brian Branch, first safety off the board out of Alabama. What do you like about Branch?
So Brian Branch played slot corner for Bama, but he kind of projects as probably a safety overhang defender type of player. He's really just a great defensive back that you want on your team. And I love the fit for Minnesota. If you've watched Minnesota's defense, it's just the most disgusting soft zone coverage ever. And the reason that like a team like the 2021 Rams was able to play essentially the same defense and have the best defense in the NFL, and the Vikings have one of the worst defenses in the NFL, is because the Vikings there is so much space in underneath zones. When if you check it down or throw a quick slant, instead of being like a 5-yard gain, which the defense would be fine with, it's like a 14-yard gain because people just aren't fast closing to the football. Brian Branch is probably the best tackling defensive back that I've ever watched. When I was going through his film, I just kept saying to myself, I was like, the hardest hidden safety in the league, though. Like, I just kept saying that because, dude, he just flies into the backfield and just lays some of the craziest hits. Really good ball skills in terms of getting his head turned around when he's like out of phase down the field. He's comfortable recovering and playing the football. So I think having someone like that for the Vikings secondary would be huge.
At 28, you've got the Broncos adding to their already pretty fantastic defensive side of the ball. Mike Morris out of Michigan, the edge defender. What is it about Morris that you think makes him a first-round pick?
Michigan's kind of become an edge rusher factory over the last few years. Mike Morris has some pretty dominant tape, especially towards the back half of the season. He's still raw as a pass rusher, really kind of just like overpowering Big Ten offensive tackles at this point, not really winning with moves or technique as much. I think for the Broncos, I was considering a guy like Felix Anaduke Uzama out of Kansas State here. But he's more of like an undersized pass rusher, similar to what they have in Baron Browning and the guy from Oklahoma, who I'm drawing a blank on. So I wanted to get a more like bigger bodied kind of base end to play in that defense.
At 29, here's another receiver, the last receiver you have in this first round mock that you already alluded to the fact that it's probably a bit of a reach, not quite a first round draft grade. But you've got the Bills going with Rashee Rice, wide receiver out of SMU, 6'3", 206, senior. What do you like about Rashee?
My favorite thing about Rashee Rice is that he responded to me on Twitter.
So he gets to be in the first round mock, baby. That's how it works.
So that he was right on my mind. But he's a contested catch demon.
What'd you ask him about on Twitter? What'd you slide in the DMs for?
Well, no, I tweeted, I was like, hello, Rashee Rice. And it was like a play that I tweeted out a play. And then he was like, hello, with like a heart emoji or something.
Fair enough.
But yeah, he, 96 receptions, 1,344 yards, 10 touchdowns. Really, at his size, his ability to shake defenders downfield is pretty impressive. And I think he's someone that kind of, as I get more into the tape, I was viewing him as a second to third round guy, and then I kind of had to force him into this mock draft. So I thought it was a reach, but then the more I watch of him, I think back into the first round, that could be a pretty solid pick. And I'd much rather take my chances on a guy like Rashee Rice, where, if he doesn't work out, he might be like a solid wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3. I think I would rather take that than like Bijan Robinson or a running back, like a lot of people have mocked to the Bills.
Fair enough. At 30, you have the Chiefs going with B.J. Ojulari, the junior edge defender out of LSU, 6'3", 250. It's Azeez Ojulari's younger brother, if anybody is familiar with Azeez. Tell me about B.J.
So B.J. Ojulari probably has the best bend around the edge for any pass rusher in this class. There's so many plays where it looks like he's about to get flushed out of the pocket, like the tackle's in good position, and then he just has the second wind at the very top of his rush to bend back to the quarterback at an angle. It's something that you just have to like watch really to see, because he there just aren't many edge rushers that are as explosive and that can move the way he does. Seems to have pretty good arm length as well. And the Chiefs have just, I mean, for what seems like forever now, they haven't had really consistent production at edge rusher.
Right. Finally, with the last pick in this first round draft, and yes, it's only 31 picks in the first round, boys and girls, because the Dolphins had to forfeit their pick for tampering with Thomas Edward Patrick Brady last offseason. We've got the Eagles at 31 picking a guy that this is early in the process for me, James. I know that you've been head over heels in the pool of draft discourse for a while now, but in my very early studies, this is a guy that has become one of my favorites to talk about. I think he's fascinating, and I would be very upset if the Eagles got away with getting him with one of their 2 first-round picks. It's Kelee Ringo, cornerback out of Georgia. Tell me about Kelee, what you like, and then I'm curious to hear, because this is one of my guys. Tell me what it is about Kelee that maybe has you concerned, or maybe, is the reason you have him further down your cornerback list.
Yeah, Kelee Ringo is, consensus number 9 overall player in the class.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people have him top 10 on their big boards. I don't really see him as a first round player. He at 6'2", he's got the long speed. That's really the main combination that draws your initial interest. And then on paper, he's a good press corner. He's a good press corner in the first 1.5 seconds of the play. He can be dominant, really disruptive at the line of scrimmage, but incredible stiffness in his hips. He gets juked out a ton. If he misses with his hands, he panics and flips his hips too early or gets his feet off balance. Shifty receivers in open space, they're getting by him a lot of times. And it's kind of like there's a limited role where I see Kelee Ringo being successful in the NFL, because I don't think he's a player that you just draft as like, we need our cornerback 1 and you're just going to play press man. Every snap. I think he's going to get beat a lot. And he did get beat a lot in the college level. I went into the playoff game saying Kelee Ringo was a player that had some of the most to prove out of any player in terms of trying to get into the first round. And I thought that it was one of his worst performances on tape, and I've gone through, just finished up Kelee Ringo's film, actually watched all of his 2022 games these past couple of days. And yeah, he's a pretty comfortable cornerback 5, cornerback 6 in this class. Right. My biggest, my favorite landing spot for him would be a team like Philadelphia, again, where he doesn't have to be immediately productive. And I think he could also be a potential safety convert. I would be interested to see if he didn't work out at cornerback, because the traits are there. I mean, he absolutely has top 10 traits. I just don't think he's that good of a player at this point.
Well, James, we've been here for an hour and it's been absolutely fantastic. This is what I'm talking about for some draft content. We appreciate you and your time, of course. Tell the people that are still sticking around where they can find some more fantastic bits of your work on the internet.
Yeah, A to Z Sports Film Room on YouTube. Just posted a Devin Witherspoon cornerback 1 film breakdown. Some insanely good tape. If you want to go check that out. And also follow me on Twitter at NoFlagsFilm, where I tweet out a bunch of cut-ups. Yeah.
Awesome, man. We appreciate your time. We'll talk to you again next week. Have a good one.
All right, man. See you.
All right, before you go, first of all, appreciate you all tuning in on whatever day it happens to be. Not one of our regularly scheduled programmings, so we appreciate you listening. Real quick, make sure that you are subscribed to the show so you can get our regular Monday and Friday Titans-centric podcasts. We'll be talking about all things Titans throughout this, I'm sure, tumultuous offseason. Until next time, for James Foster, who is our guest today, and producer JT, I am Easton Freeze. This has been the Hot Read Podcast. We'll talk to you next time.